The rugged beauty of the American West comes alive in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah. From snow-covered peaks rising to touch the sky, to sheer cliffs and deep canyons containing a wealth of minerals and history, this land has been a witness to a battle that has been fought for over 130 years. The Battle of Trains over Soldier Summit. Seven Idea Productions paid several visits to this former Rio Grande line and offer a stunning look at mountain railroading in the Wasatch. Union Pacific coal and merchandise trains are seen daily, with manned helpers often used on heavy westbounds. BNSF makes an appearance via trackage rights. Amtrak's California Zephyr steals through the night. And the Utah Railway steals the show with their incredible power lash-ups of Morrison Knudsen MK50-3s. And 6 mid-train swing helpers. This is mountain railroading you can see and feel. Heading west out of Helper, trains thunder through the Price River Canyon's 2.4% grade. Watch trains racing through Colton as they march up the east side of Soldier Summit. See all 3 levels of the Gilluly Loops as we hike through this remote section of the railroad. Plus, you'll see the famed Thistle Tunnels. Winter in the Wasatch Mountains can be harsh, with heavy blowing snow, and our high-definition cameras caught it all for you to see in the comfort of your living room. This is Soldier Summit, Union Pacific's Provo subdivision. Union Pacific's route over Soldier Summit begins at Helper, Utah, on the east side of the Wasatch Mountains. Part of UP's Salt Lake City area, the Provo sub heads northwest along the Price River Canyon through Nolan, Kyune, and Colton before reaching the summit at an elevation of 7,477 feet. Trains then immediately head down the west side, passing through Gilluly, Narrows, Rio, and the Spanish Fork Canyon before breaking out of the Wasatch Mountains 10 miles south of Provo. The line is double-tracked, with movements governed by CTC and controlled by UP Dispatcher 78 in Omaha. Balancing Rock is perched high upon the Book Cliffs, overlooking Helper, Utah. Situated in Carbon County on the east side of the Wasatch Mountains, Helper is a railroad town, as the name strongly suggests. Both a division point and crew change point on today's Union Pacific, Helper also serves as a station stop for Amtrak's California Zephyr. Crew offices are located near the west end of the yard, and a set of Helper engines idle nearby. In a tradition dating back to the late 1800s with the Rio Grande narrow gauge, manned helpers are still used to get heavy trains up the 2.4% grade to Soldier Summit. A westbound coal train will soon be arriving, the day's first assignment for these 3 GEs. At the west end of the yard, we see a clear signal on Main 1 for UP 6702. The lead engineer tells the helper engineer they are ready to depart.
6702, helps. Here we go, over. Alright, we're shoving, over.
We see the three helpers working mid-train. Two additional radio-controlled engines shove hard on the rear of the train as it heads for the Price River Canyon at milepost 627.3. Partially hidden behind a signal bridge are a string of tank cars sitting in a yard belonging to the Utah Railway. Formed in 1912 to serve several coal mines in the area, the Utah Railway operates daily over Soldier Summit and has trackage rights over the UP between Provo, Utah and Grand Junction, Colorado. This yard is located along the Utah Railway's 45-mile-long Moreland branch, which ties into the UP at Utah Railway Junction. Called URJ for short by railroaders, Utah Railway Junction is located just west of Helper at milepost 628.8. Utah Railway 5005 appears at URJ with a heavy coal train in tow. The 5005's new paint scheme reflects the railroad's parent company, the Genesee & Wyoming, which purchased the Utah Railway in 2002. The train has permission from UP Dispatcher 78 in Omaha, Nebraska, to enter the Provo sub as it slowly approaches the junction. Five units on the point were originally built by Morrison Knudsen in 1994 as MK5000s. These locomotives came with a 5,000 horsepower Caterpillar engine, which proved unreliable and was later replaced with a 3,500 horsepower EMD prime mover. Utah Railway owns 6 of these engines, which are all reclassified as MK50-3s. They still have their Morrison-Knudsen look about them, but if you listen carefully, you'll know they are EMD SD50s at heart. The train stops to have 6 swing helpers cut in for the heavy grade ahead. The cars are separated back in the yard, and the train pulls ahead for a short distance. With the helpers added, the engineer sounds a whistle, and the climb to Soldier Summit begins. It's a downhill run from Utah Railway Yard to the Junction. As soon as the train enters the UP, the climb begins. 5 EMD SD50s and the 6th MK50-3 smoke it up as the engineer on the swing helpers comes out on the throttle, commanding an additional 21,000 horsepower to the middle of the train. UP 6564 West leads a 98-car mixed manifest train under the signal bridges at URJ. As the railroad continues west, it passes the Castle Gate Power Plant near milepost 630. Owned by Pacific Corp, the plant burns around 1,800 tons of coal per day, which is brought in by truck. It generates enough electricity to serve 300,000 customers and employs roughly 100 people. At night, the plant lights up the scene as we await the arrival of Amtrak 5, the westbound California Zephyr, on its run between Chicago and the West Coast. During the fall and winter months, Amtrak usually comes through after dark, as was the case tonight. Milepost 630.5 marks the ghost town of Castle Gate, which was home to some historical events. In 1897, Butch Cassidy, a famous Western outlaw, made off with $8,000 in gold and silver at a busy railroad station here. In 1924, the nearby Castle Gate Mine No. 2 exploded, killing 172 miners, the third worst mining disaster in the nation at the time. And in 2000, another mine explosion resulted in deaths. Both the mines and the town have since vanished into history. UP 5547 leads a heavy coal train past the old ghost town as the grade stiffens to 2.2%. The Utah Railway is seen again, as UR 5005 leads another heavy coal train up the grade past Castle Gate. Though the engines are in Notch 8, or full throttle, the train slows as it enters the heavy grade. By the time the mid-train helpers arrive, the 104-car train has slowed considerably, feeling the impact of the heavy grade. Castle Gate gets its name from a tall spire that looks like a giant gate guarding the entrance to the Price River Canyon. There used to be two, but the left gate was removed during the construction of what is now Highway 6. The remaining formation makes a nice backdrop as a former Southern Pacific GE leads an empty coal train downgrade on its way to Helper. Winter in the Wasatch Mountains brings a blanket of snow as icy winds chisel through the jagged walls of the canyon. The brunt of the storm is being felt on the west side, with near whiteout conditions at the summit. The lower end of the Price River Canyon is somewhat protected from the storm's fury as an eastbound empty coal train heads down Main 2. Below the west end of Castle Gate, UP 7094 leads train MNYRO, a Denver to Salt Lake City manifest, up the grade on Main 1. The maximum grade on the east side of Soldier Summit is 2.4%. Another westbound manifest digs in for the climb as it passes the crossovers at Lynn. Above Lynn, the former Rio Grande line follows the Price River deeper into the canyon. UP 6702 and 6 big AC-powered GE sisters take their coal train up the east grade of the Wasatch. Utah Railway coal trains always put on a great show as they climb through the Price River Canyon. 5 MK50-3s on the point and 6 more units in the middle are spilling their guts in Run 8, making for a combined 38,500 horsepower. This is the sight and sound of mountain railroading in the Wasatch. The train approaches the Nolan Tunnels at milepost 636.1 on the number 1 track. We return to Nolan Tunnels in the wintertime. A BNSF Provo to Denver Q train heads down grade on Main 2. BNSF has trackage rights over Soldier Summit and runs manifest trains daily between Provo and Denver. This meet illustrates the benefit of a double-track mainline, as neither train has to wait in a siding for the other to pass. After exiting the Nolan Tunnels, the track makes a giant horseshoe, following the river's course away from the highway. Moving down to water level, UP 5547 West is seen squealing through the horseshoe. The tracks make a nice S-curve as they come out of the horseshoe. The snow is getting heavier as UP 7230 leads train MNYRO up the grade. There are 3 sets of tunnels on UP's Provo sub. The second set is at Kyune, milepost 638.7. UR 5005 approaches the tunnels as it nears the end of the heavy grade on Main 2. The train disappears into the 468-foot bore of Kyune Tunnel on Track 2. Moving to the uphill side, BNSF 5995 West exits the 410-foot bore of the tunnel on Track 1. Kyune is a location of a 5,230-foot center passing track. It is also where the grade eases to less than 1% for the next 6 miles to Colton. UP 7407 leads train MRONY down the gentle grade near the east end of Kyune on a rainy morning. Dropping down into the canyon at Kyune, we see the Utah Railway 5005 charging up Main 1 with westbound coal loads. The Price River hides under a blanket of snow, while UP 7446 East takes an empty coal train through Kyune. Perched above the west end of Kyune, UP 6702 is seen again. It will soon be stopping at Colton to have its mid-train helpers removed. Colton is located 5 miles west of Kyune. This is where manned helpers are usually cut off westbound trains. UP 6638 is cut away from the train, and the light power runs through the crossovers from Main 1 to Main 2. After this is done, the helper crew then will assist in putting the train back together. With the crossovers realigned for Main 1, the UP 6702 carefully backs down to a joint with the rear of the train. The conductor on the helper set guides the train over the radio.
Last one on the 6702.
1.
That will do on the 6702. Little stretch, please.
You stretching?
Okay, we're set center.
With the train back together, the helpers return east to Helper for their next assignment, and the UP 6702 will soon continue west. Colton is a junction for a 21-mile spur track known as the Pleasant Valley Subdivision, serving the Skyline coal mine. Built as a narrow gauge line, it was converted to standard gauge in 1890, along with the main route over Soldier Summit. The track is still in use today. BNSF 6242 West meets an eastbound UP at Colton. The BNSF slows for a stop at the crossovers at Colton, which is control point CPRG 645. The train doesn't have to wait long, as the UP dispatcher soon gives the BNSF a green signal to continue west. A clear signal on Main 1 tells us our next train is approaching. Utah Railway 5004 appears around a curve with 100 loads of coal. Unlike the UP 6702, this train's manned helpers will not be removed here, but will stay on the train for the trip down the west side. Between Colton and Summit, the track speed increases from 35 to 60, giving trains a short stretch of fast running before the downhill grade begins. This may be somewhat lost on heavy coal trains. UR 5005 tries to pick up speed after departing Colton, and if you look carefully, you can see a plume of exhaust from the hard-working swing helpers as a train approaches the camera. Empty coal trains are a different matter. UP 6765 East blasts by the camera. On a clear winter morning, UP 5722 East wastes little time after cresting Soldier Summit. An October storm brings rain to the Wasatch Mountains as BNSF 5995 West rolls through the same curve. Control point CPRG 650 marks the crossovers at the east end of Soldier Summit. The uphill grade is nearly over. The UR 5005 is in charge of a short coal train today and has dropped its helpers at Colton. Trains crest Soldier Summit at an elevation of 7,477 feet. Referred to by early explorers as Grassy Pass, the name was changed to Soldier Pass after a group of soldiers heading south to join the Confederate Army were trapped in a July snowstorm in 1861. A half dozen of the soldiers froze to death and were buried here. 19 years later, the Rio Grande Western named the pass Soldier Summit in their first timetable. Fast forwarding to October of 2012, we find an empty coal train cresting the summit in a tradition dating back 132 years. UP 5831 crests Soldier Summit with a Denver to Roper manifest. Scattered across the pass are remnants of an old town site which sprung up in the 1920s and boasted a population of 2,500. The Rio Grande machine shops provided the source of income, but when they were moved to Helper, both the money and the town dried up. Today, a gas station remains, as well as a few deserted houses and a two-room jail. A monument has also been erected remembering the soldiers who died here over a century and a half ago. At the west end of the summit is a sign warning of the downgrade ahead. UP 5734 is crossing the apex of the Wasatch Mountains, and the engineer is already preparing for the 2% drop down the west side. As the 5734 starts down the grade, we see the lights of an eastbound BNSF stopped on Main 2. It will wait for the UP to clear West Summit, then cross over to Main 1. A Utah Railway coal train is at East Summit and will be brought down the number 2 track after the BNSF clears up. It's a busy afternoon on Soldier Summit. With the UP out of the way, BNSF 5686 East rolls through the West Summit crossovers from Main 2 to Main 1. With the BNSF clear of the switch, UP Dispatcher 78 realigns the crossovers for main-to-main movement on Track 2, and the signal goes clear for the Utah Railway 5005. The 104-car coal train approaches and prepares for the downhill run to Provo. As the train passes, you will hear the engines brought to an idle as the engineer sets up the dynamic brakes. reduction of air in the train's brake pipe effectively applies the brakes to the wheels of the coal train. As car by car, it tips over the apex and starts down the hill. February 23, 2013 brought Winter Storm Rocky to the Wasatch Mountains. The heavy wind and snow at the summit brought traffic on Highway 6 to a standstill, as the visibility dropped at times to near zero. Over on the UP, trains kept rolling. UP 7446 East drags an empty coal train over the summit. As the DPUs disappear into the snow, we transition to October, where a storm of a different kind was providing ample moisture from the sky. UP 7407 East struggles up the slippery wet rail as it battles the Wasatch Mountains. Searchlight signals stand guard at West Summit Switch, just as they have for decades. It's a nearly steady 2% grade between Summit and Gilluly. Light is starting to fade on a late afternoon in February as BNSF 5950 East leads the charge up the west side of Soldier Summit. Heat from the 3GE's exhaust stacks advances skyward in the cold winter air. The Utah Railway 5005 appears out of a cut as the train drifts down grade between Summit and Gilluly. We notice that the vegetation begins to thicken on the west side of the mountains, with small trees becoming more prominent. The Gilluly Loops are a popular location for rail fans, where the tracks appear on 3 different levels along the side of a mountain. Completed in 1913, The loops replaced a dangerous 4% grade between Tucker, Utah and Soldier Summit. The 5005 heads down grade on the upper section of the loops. The engineer comes out on the throttle at a portion of track where the grade briefly lessens to around 1.5%. Hiking up to the top track, we set up near milepost 657.5. This puts us above the upper loop as UP 5990 West heads downgrade at this remote location. The third unit in the consist is unpatched SP 343, a nice catch. The train bends around a curve as it disappears through the upper horseshoe. Soon we see the 5990 below us on the middle level, with the lower section of track and Highway 6 visible in the distance. Within a few minutes, the train appears again on the lower track, having made it through the Gilluly Loops. It is now nearly 5 miles away from us by rail. From Highway 6, which was the original 4% railroad grade, we see our old friend the UP 6702 gliding downhill on the upper track, while patches of quaking aspen and brush brighten the hillside. If you were to run to the top of the track right now, this is how the train would look as it eases down the mountain. UP 6800 is in heavy dynamics as it passes milepost 657.5. UP 6923's massive radiator marks the end of the train as the big GE C60/44AC disappears around the curve above the upper horseshoe. Moving a half-mile down the tracks, we see a clear block on Main 2 near milepost 658 for Utah Railway 5003 as it brings a tank train down grade around the upper loop. The end of the train passes the camera as the engines approach a rural grade crossing at the bottom of the horseshoe. Although it is a good hike to get to this location, the Gilluly Loops are a very scenic portion of the line and are worth the effort. Even though the sky was cloudy today, the fall colors really brightened up the scene. UP 6040 East rolls through the lower loop and climbs toward our location above the Gilluly crossovers. This shot really illustrates how much elevation the railroad gains on the 2% grade. The train disappears around the upper loop and is soon seen again near the location we shot from earlier. Control point CPRG 660 marks the east end of the 7,900-foot center siding. BNSF 6242 West heads downgrade on Main 1. Note the dwarf signal guarding the switch between the center track and Main 2 as the train enters the block. As the BNSF disappears through the cut, we move to the outside of the lower loop. UP 6702 is seen one last time rolling through Gilluly. Classic coal hoppers still wearing Denver and Rio Grande speed lettering are getting harder to spot these days, so it's nice to catch a few like this one still earning revenue on its home rails. UP 7317 and 6489 handle the rear of the train as it disappears under Highway 6 on the lower loop. Returning to winter, UP 7446 East heads up the hill toward Gilluly as big snowflakes cover the ground. Before the addition of the Gilluly Loops, trains battled a 4% grade to the summit from the town of Tucker. The town became no more after the relocation in 1913, and in 2009 was buried during a realignment project for Highway 6. To remember the town, the state of Utah built the current Tie Fork Rest Area to resemble a depot from the early 1900s. It could be said that trains still run through Tucker, Utah, or at least they pass above it. The 1913 realignment changed course at Detour, milepost 665.3. We picked that location to set up on a rainy afternoon as UR 5003 rolls down grade with a short coal train. As the train departs, the grade lessens from 2% to just over 1% as it continues downhill toward Narrows. UR 5003 continues downhill on Main 2, along with the sound of traffic on nearby Highway 6, which closely parallels the tracks through the Narrows. Track speed drops from 35 to 25 as trains deal with a few tight curves. UP 5946 East heads through the Narrows with a 92-car empty coal train in tow. Near the west end of the Narrows, UP 7197 East works hard up Main 1 near milepost 674. Leaving the Narrows behind, UR 5005 approaches Rio on the 35-mile-per-hour track. The Rio crossovers are located at milepost 676.7 and are still guarded by the old-style Rio Grande signals, which have recently had their masts repainted. UP 5734 races west on the point of a 93-car MNYRO. Winter in the western Wasatch Mountains is simply spectacular on a clear sunny day. We are located just east of the Thistle Tunnels, which bore over 3,000 feet into Billy's Mountain. The weather wasn't quite so sunny when we hiked to the east portal of the tunnels. A winter storm was just starting to hit the region, and the snow began to accumulate rather quickly. UP 7446 is seen one last time as it exits Thistle Tunnel on the number 1 track. The rear-end units, 6533 and 7659, were not needed to get the empty coal train up the hill. So, to save fuel, they were simply drugged behind the train. The Thistle Tunnels are the most recent realignment of the line over Soldier Summit. In 1983, a landslide 1,000 feet wide, 200 feet thick, and a mile long buried the Rio Grande's main line, severing it for nearly 3 months. The slide also dammed up the Spanish Fork River, creating a lake which destroyed the nearby town of Thistle. The new alignment required the boring of twin tunnels through Billy's Mountain, just above the location of the slide. Looking down on Spanish Fork, one can still see portions of the original line below the current grade. The Thistle Slide remains the worst natural disaster to date in Utah. Moving to the west bore of the Thistle Tunnels, we are in time to catch the Utah Railway 5005 as it heads down the 2% grade on the realigned Main 2. Fall is at its peak in the Wasatch Mountains. The hills above the Spanish Fork River are dressed in lush shades of autumn. The mixture of small trees and shrubs blanket the surrounding countryside in a patch quilt of color that is nothing less than striking, especially on a day when the sun just can't seem to burn through the October clouds. Utah Railway 5003 heads through the scene on its westward journey to Provo, after coming through a rainstorm higher up in the mountains. West of Castilla, at milepost 687.25, UP 5946 heads east through an S-curve. We finally break out of the Wasatch Mountains near milepost 690 on the Provo sub. Here, the tracks split, each taking its own way to Provo. And eastbound is on Main 2 as it departs an urban setting and gets ready for the mountains ahead. The crew of the UP 6445 will be in Helper at the end of their run, just 63 miles and a mountain range away. We set up on Main 1 as our last train approaches. The UP 7126 finally gets to stretch its legs after dealing with the stiff grades of the Wasatch Mountains over Soldier Summit. For over 130 years, trains have rolled over this Utah mountain pass in a tradition of the Denver and Rio Grande Western. We hope you've enjoyed the trains, grades, and magnificent scenery that together make Soldier Summit a fascinating place to visit. Thanks for watching.